Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his treatise On Being a Busybody, one of the features of what we could call busybodiness or morbid curiosity, all of which are great translations of Polupragmosunēs, which is what he's talking about. One of the key features of this is that the person who is afflicted with this suffers from what in Greek we call akrasia. Sometimes it's translated in older translations as incontinence, or weakness of will is another one. I actually prefer lack or loss of self-control, a control over oneself that ancient thinkers thought that a person ought to have, to be able to keep desires, appetites in check and not be drawn into doing what you know isn't actually good because of your giving into them. It's an inability, you could say, to resist temptations that other people, even if they're not completely virtuous, should generally be able to exercise their capacity for choice and not give into. So he is going to say in the middle of this discussion, parts of which we're going to go backwards into, that inquisitiveness, which is another possible translation, polupragmosunēs, now notice this is the verb here, is going to be connected with a lack of self-control, akrasias. So akrasia is the nominative, akrasias, that's the genitive. It's of, it is connected with, it comes from, we could say. And then he makes a really interesting connection and comparison, just as much as adultery is. So in ancient culture, and I would say even in our own modern culture where we have, rather different mores and understandings of the, marriage and committed relationships, being an adulterer was a really bad thing. There were laws against it. They would be punished, sometimes by those who they'd transgressed against, sometimes by the actual legal apparatus. And it was frowned upon. If you cannot keep your hands off of other people's spouses, you're a troublemaker. And why would people give into that? Well, we have sexual desire, and some people are unable, or they're actually to some degree able, but they give in, right? So a possibility of a liaison presents itself, and they're like, oh, I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to anyways. And they could be cheating on their spouse. They could be seducing somebody else's spouse. We might say in committed relationships, the adulterer is the person who violates that commitment. And why do they do it? Some people do it because they genuinely have a terrible problem. They cannot control themselves whatsoever. But a lot of them, they have one mistake that they make. It's a one-night stand, right? Well, curiosity can be like that as well. You can know that you shouldn't be doing it, and you can still give into it. And then he goes on, and he says that it's also, that is inquisitiveness, indicative of terrible mindlessness or thoughtlessness Anoios is the word there. So nous, noia is your mind, right? And a lack of thinking, a lack of using your brain, we might say. Terrible is dene, meaning fearful. Like, this is on a large scale. And then foolishness, aphrosunes. This is an actual vice of folly as opposed to practical wisdom or prudence. So is it always accompanied by these? Maybe Plutarch is being a little bit, sweeping here. He's using some rhetoric, but it could easily fall into these sorts of things. So what we've got here is a picture of somebody who could control themselves, but for whatever reason doesn't, probably because they're badly off. And so they go and start getting into everybody else's business and inquiring into it. So he gives a really interesting analogy here. He says, to pass by so many women who are public property open to all. What does he mean by that? Well, if you really, really needed to get laid and you were a man who had some means in ancient society, you could find some way to do that, right? There were houses that were open. There were women who were devoted to that sort of thing. So, is this exactly the case now? But if you want to hook up with somebody, it's not, all that difficult in the internet age. And so they pass by, as he says, public women, and instead they're seeking out women who are off limits. Like he's going to go on and he says, they're drawn to a woman who's kept under lock and key and is expensive and often, if it so happens, quite ugly. So what are you doing there? Why are you trying to go after somebody who you have to take all this trouble to pursue? Well, it's because you want the thrill of doing something forbidden, of finding out what's going on with this person. It's sort of like saying, if you want to look at naked bodies, we have an internet that's full of pornography. That's super, super easy to do. So why are you peering in your neighbor's window or setting up hidden cameras somewhere when if it was just naked bodies, you could do that as much as you want? It's the secretness part of it. And Plutarch is going to go on and say, that's stupid. That really is foolishness there. It's the height of insanity, right? So what is going on? It's giving in to something. And he says, well, this is the same thing that busybodies are doing. They pass by things that are beautiful to see and hear, many matters excellent for relaxation and amusement. And instead, what do they spend their time? What do they devote their time to? Other people's trifling correspondence, their letters. We might, actually use like texts and emails. You got to look at somebody's phone, gluing their ears to their neighbor's walls, like listening in on them, whispering with slaves and women of the streets, trying to get some information about people. And oftentimes, like he says, not just seeking out what's secret, but also what's dangerous, could get you injured. And always, he says, infamy, adoxos, right? So it's bad for your reputation if you get found out. So there's something unsavory, unseemly about this. And you can say, well, why do they do it then? Well, this failure to stick to what they know they ought to be doing, a lack of self-control. They give in to this temptation to dig into other people's stuff. And now going backwards in the text, Plutarch is going to say, so, there's some examples and effects of this. The busybody loses confidence from everyone, or we could say trust or fidelity. And the word there is actually pistis, which means faith, but it also means the faith that you put in another person. So if you know that somebody is subject to loss of self-control, due to their desire to know, as all of us do have, at least to some degree, all of us have some curiosity. If we know that somebody is liable to give in to that, well, then we're not going to trust them. And he says, we would prefer to entrust our letters and papers and seals not to inquisitive friends and relatives, the people who we should be trusting, but to slaves and to strangers instead of them. That tells you how badly off we think they are. And then he brings up a great Greek hero, Bellerophon, who didn't break the seal on a letter accusing him, which he was carrying, but kept his hands off the king's letter by reason of the same opposite of loss of self-control, enkrateia, the same continence it's translated here, that kept him from the king's wife. So instead of, he could have been an adulterer, he could have given in to temptation, he doesn't do it. He could have looked at the letter, he doesn't do it. Right? He's trustworthy. The busybody, we can't trust them because they do give in. So he, going back a little bit earlier in the text, says that, a necessary consequence of this curiosity that people have is to speak evil, to literally kakologian, right? Kakos is something bad. So they want to talk about everybody's problems, everybody's troubles. As we say, bring the dirty laundry out so other people can see it. This is another lack of self-control. It would be one thing if they just like to know what other people don't know. They like to get into everybody's secrets. But once they actually know the secrets, they can't keep their mouths shut. They need to tell the secret to somebody else. So he says, what the curious delight to hear, they delight to tell. What they zealously collect from others, they joyously reveal to everyone else. So what is the result of this? After you get to know these people, you're, like, well, don't tell them anything. Is he's going to say? Their disease interferes with their desire. It literally sets up an impediment to their epithumia, this desire that they have to know things. Everyone's going to be on their guard against them. They're like, don't talk to Jim because he always tells the secrets. So he's got some great lines here. He says, everybody hides things from them and is reluctant to do anything while a busybody is looking or say anything while one is listening. They defer consultation and they postpone the consideration of business until such an inquisitive person is out of the way. When some secret matter is under discussion or some important business is being transacted and a busybody comes on the scene, people drop the matter from discussion and conceal it. Now, notice this great comparison. As people do with a tidbit, a little bit of food, when a cat comes by. Why? Because the cat wants to eat it. So you hide it, and then the cat goes away. Same thing with the busybody. You can't trust them, so you don't talk in their presence. You're like, ixnaeon is, the old pig Latin that people would use. Don't say anything about this particular thing. And so, this is another way of losing the confidence of other people. The last thing that I want to bring up here in terms of examples of this lack of self-control is a little bit earlier, and it has to do with news. So people who are busybodies, they ignore their own interests, what they should be paying attention to, because they're preoccupied with other people's business. They're constantly looking at what's going on with their neighbor. He says only rarely do they visit the farm because, when they do, they have more of an eye for their neighbor's vines than their own, and they ask how many of their neighbor's cattle have died or how much of his wine has turned sour. But they're soon sated with such news and turn away. So they're not good farmers because the genuine farmer is not interested in news about their neighbors or the city. But the busybody, as he says, pushes into the bazaar and the marketplace and the harbors, and their constant question, is there any news? Now, when we say news, what we mean is new information, something that's current, something that is perhaps exclusive. You know it, other people don't know it, now you can reveal it. So they get kind of obsessed with finding out what is going on. They want to know more than other people do. And if somebody says, well, there isn't any news, what happens to them? They get annoyed. It upsets them that they can't have what it is that they so desperately want. And the word there for getting upset or annoyed, achthomenos, right? It's part of the anger vocabulary. They get angry, they get irritated, and they'll say, didn't you interview these people? What's going on here? And they'll ask people to give them private information. And so he says, just as cooks pray for a good crop of new animals, fishermen pray for a good haul of fish, in the same way, busybodies pray for a good crop of calamities, a good haul of difficulties, for novelties and changes, so that they've got something to think about and talk about. Again, they can't keep to their own business. They're always needing to go out and find something that will appeal to this desire that they have to get into everybody else's stuff, and not just for the good things, but generally for the bad things. So there is a lack of self-control that is at the heart of this disposition of, however you want to call it, inquisitiveness, busybodiness, morbid curiosity, that Plutarch wants to alert us to. And he will also give us some ways in which we can deal with this if that happens to be a problem for us.